Hey, everybody. So today we're going to talk about local government, and that's city and county and special districts. Now, behind me, you can see the Kennedale City Council chambers. I sit right by that flag right there. That's the mayor's seat. This is a little bit of an older picture. We've added some new monitors. But, Thomas Jefferson had once said that local government was the most important government. And it's true. It is the most important government. It's the one that deals with you on almost a daily basis. During the coronavirus crisis, you're seeing a lot of the county taking steps up on social distancing, which businesses can open and not open. They run the county jail. We're going to talk about all that shortly. And then think about your city. You get your water from your city, sewage taken care of by your city, trash pickup, streets, parks, police, fire, you name it. That's all city government. So if you're going to have an interaction with government, it's going to usually be at the county or city level. But it's one of the least understood governments by the public. They don't understand a lot of it, partly because it's not in the news a lot. You don't see it covered on the news unless somebody does something wrong, and then it becomes a news story. If you were to ask people like, say, in Kennedale, who the mayor is, my guess is that probably 70% couldn't tell you who I am, and that includes my parents. So we're going to first start talking about, in this lecture, city government, and then we'll record another lecture on county government. So let's talk about city government. In Texas, there are two types of cities. One is known as a general law city. This is for populations of less than 5,000 people. General law cities, and that's the most common type of city in Texas, they do not have a lot of freedom in how they organize their city government, how they raise money, how they tax, none of that. That's usually dictated by the state. And there are Class A, B, and C general law cities, which Class C general law cities are the smallest, I think, with a population of 600 or under. So general law cities, small towns that don't have a lot of leeway in creating their government, and they have less than 5,000 population. Now, on the other hand, you have home rule cities, which have a population of 5,000 or more, and Kennedale is one of those. Kennedale became a home rule city about 20 years ago. So a home rule city has a population of 5,000 or more, and they have a lot more freedom in choosing the style of city government they want to have, and the taxing authority, franchise fees, zoning, you name it, they get a lot more authority. Now, if you want to become a home rule city, the first thing you have to do is that you have to have a charter. A charter is like the constitution for the city. It spells out the form of city government you're going to have, what the roles of the different departments are. It tends to be an outline of your government and types of elections you're going to have, you name it. So we have one in Canada. It's a fairly short document, and charters should be short documents. That's important. Well, so the first thing you do is you write a charter, and usually you get a group of citizens, a charter committee, and they write it, and then that has to go to a vote of the people. And if the people vote for it, you become a home rule city. If they vote against it, you stay a general law city. And you can come back again to them and have another vote. We did that in Canada. We had 2 votes, and it passed the second time. So once you become a home rule city, you're always a home rule city. So if, for example, Kennedale, which now has a population of over 8,000, something happened and everybody left and we're down to 3,000, we stay a home rule city. Once home rule, always home rule. So now we have to think about, if you're going to become a home rule city, what kind of form of government do you want to have? And there are several types. The first one we want to talk about is the commission form. The commission form of government was created in Texas after the terrible Galveston hurricane that killed 6,000 to 8,000 people. And they found that their local government really wasn't professional enough to really handle the crisis in 1900. And so they created this commission form. And in the commission form, you have a group of commissioners that are elected. There's the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the public works commissioner, the sanitation commissioner, these different commissioners, and their job is to run those departments. And people who run for those offices are supposedly going to be experts in those fields. I mean, you wouldn't elect somebody to be the police commissioner if they didn't have a law enforcement background, or the fire commissioner if they didn't know anything about firefighting. Now, the problem with this commission form of government was there was really nobody in charge. They didn't have one person in charge. There was a lot of turf battles. And a lot of time people were electing people who were not qualified for the office that they were running for. They didn't have any fire experience. They knew nothing about sanitation, none of that. So it's fallen out of favor. It's now used in Texas in only the smallest of cities, in Class C general law cities. Now, another form is what you call the mayor council, where you have an elected mayor who serves as sort of the chief executive, like a president or a governor, and then you have a council that serves as the legislative body. And that can be broken down into two types of mayor councils. There's the strong mayor council, where the mayor has a veto power, hiring, firing powers of different department heads, has a big say-so in the budget, appointment and removal powers. I think I just said that. All those powers. Now, that's not popular in Texas because we've distrusted strong central government. And so it's really only used in two cities, Houston and El Paso, of the major cities. Dallas tried to do it a few years ago and it didn't work. The people did not want it. I think that was under Mayor Laura Miller at one point. And then the other version is the weak mayor council, where the mayor is a chief executive but has very little power. It's mainly ceremonial. The mayor runs the meetings, attends ribbon cuttings, but usually lacks a hiring, firing power, or budgetary powers, or a veto power. Now, the last time we want to talk about came out of the progressive era, where they were looking for greater professionalism and greater democracy. And that is the council manager form. In a council manager form, you have a mayor and a council elected by the people, and then they turn around and hire a professionally trained city manager to run the city on a day-to-day basis. So we operate that in Kennedale. Now, this can vary from place to place. Some places the mayor gets a vote, and some places he doesn't. I don't get a vote unless there's a tie. But the idea here is that the city is too complicated for anybody who doesn't know anything about cities to run it. I've been in city government now for 22 years, and I could not be a city manager. I don't know all those ins and outs. I know a lot about it, but I wouldn't try to pass myself off as a city manager. So you try to hire somebody who's got a degree in it, and a lot of schools around here offer that now, UTA, North Texas, and usually that city manager is the best paid person in the city because it's a lot of work. I mean, I can tell you our city manager makes more than the governor. So the idea here is that you have a council who sit behind me, and they pass laws, ordinances, usually based on the staff recommendation. They set the policy for the city, they set the tax rate, they adopt a budget, and they provide a direction for where the city wants to go. Then it's up to the city manager to administer that direction and get it where the city wants to go. Council members are not to be involved in the day-to-day operations of city government. It's not my job or any member of the council to go and tell the fire chief to do this, or the police chief, you better do this. We can't do that. That's circumventing the city manager and therefore removing his power. If department heads think that they can go around the city manager, then your government's not going to run very smoothly. On the other hand, the city manager is not supposed to be involved in the politics. In fact, the Texas City Managers Association, the TCMA, and the ICMA, the International City Managers Association, have ethic guidelines where they can't put signs in the yards for candidates, and that they are to remain neutral as much as possible. So that gets tough. I mean, because the life expectancy on the job, and I'm saying they're dying, but they change jobs. If a city manager is probably 4 to 5 years at one city, because, for example, if we look at my city manager, he was hired 3 years ago, maybe 4, I can't remember now, but and then immediately 3 of those members of the council got defeated for re-election. And that meant that you had a majority of the council that had no interest in that hire. They have no stake in it. And so they may not be as supportive as the people that did hire him. Now, the city manager's protection was that it takes 4, or usually a supermajority in most cities, to hire or fire a city manager. And for these people who may not like the city manager, they only had 3 votes, and there wasn't much they could do. Now, city managers, if you've got 3 votes against you in a 5-member council voting members, then what happens is that, you start thinking, well, what's going to happen in the next election the following year? And you might start looking for another job. I've seen that happen several times before. So it's a tough job being a city manager. And I've liked all 3 city managers I've worked with. I did vote to fire one, but I think I'm still friendly with him today. But it's tough, and it's a hard job to do. Well, so that's the city manager and the council manager form. Now, let's talk about elections. Now, city council elections tend to be nonpartisan affairs. There's no party label. You don't run as a Republican or a Democrat. But I probably could tell you that on my council right now, if I were to think it through, there are 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and there's just me. And the reason that it's nonpartisan is that the issues that we face at the city level are usually nonpartisan issues. I mean, we're talking about fixing a street, building a park, getting new police cars, a new fire station, or whatever. These aren't partisan issues. And, I've worked with councils which were, at least 2 members were very liberal and 3 members were very conservative. But they got along very well and got the job done because they took those political leanings out of the equation when we're talking about fixing streets or whatever. And I think cities go wrong when they get out of that lane sometimes and they start getting involved in national affairs. And we haven't done that here. So nonpartisan. So the job is also usually a non-paying job. Very few cities pay council members anything other than a sort of a part-time salary. I think in Fort Worth, I think the mayor may make $37,000 a year, which may sound a lot like to you, but to run the city, you're giving up a lot. I think the mayor of Arlington probably makes $50 a meeting. I think you all know I make $1 a month. And in other places, it's $5 a month or $10 a month. And that's because people who run for this office run for other reasons than money. I think that there's usually these reasons that people run. Either they're mad about something and they want to run and change the government. They think, well, it's all bad and we're going to go change it. Or 2, they're looking to move up to a higher office at some point. And this is a stepping stone to maybe going from city council to something in the county, and then maybe to the state level. And then 3, and this is the one that I've experienced with every member of my council that I've worked with, is that they just care about the city. And I think that's true for most city councils around Tarrant County. And some of the council members have worked actively to get me kicked off as being mayor, but they still have the best interest of the city at heart. And I'll give you a quick example during this coronavirus thing, is that the last person who ran against me as mayor, it was a tough fight. It was a fairly negative campaign, no doubt about it. But as soon as we hit this coronavirus crisis, they reached out to me and said, what can I do to help? I want to help. And to me, that speaks volumes of that person, that they would do that. And I think most people are that way. So now we decide that you're going to run for office and what reasons you're going to run. Does it cost money to run for office? Yeah, usually. Because you've got to go out and buy lawn signs. Those are usually about $7 a piece. Big signs are another $100. You can easily spend in a small town like Kennedale $10,000 running for office. In big cities, of course, you can think it gets even higher in that regards, because you'll send out mailers and things like that. But usually these kind of elections are going to be elections of how many people you know, because there's a small turnout, usually a turnout maybe 10% of the voters who turn out to vote. So when you run, you just got to make sure that you know a lot of people and make those connections, and that helps you win. A lot of times you run unopposed. I have a mayor friend of mine who's run unopposed, I think, for 20 years as mayor. I've had one opponent my last election, and I've got one this election that's going to come up in November. Usually city elections and county elections or local elections are in May, but because of the coronavirus that we went through this year, we had to move it back to November. So I've got another opponent this time, and he seems like a really good guy. Doesn't have a lot of experience, but seems like a really nice guy. So looking forward to that race. So now let's talk about the different types of election systems. You can use what we call a single member district or at-large election. At-large elections, like we operate in Kennedale, allows for everybody in the city to vote for every member of the council. So the way we do it here is that our terms are 2 years, and 1 year you have 3 people up for re-election, and the next year you have another 3 people up for re-election, and everybody gets to vote on those people. Now, that works fairly well in a small city because it would be difficult for us to use this other method I'm going to talk about here shortly. There's a subset of the at-large election system called the place system. It's part of an at-large election system, but there's places. You choose a place you want to run. So if I were to, can I put my finger over here? If I was going to run in seat 1, hang on, I'm getting there. There's seat 1, or seat 2 or 3. You choose to run in that seat. You get to check the box, I'm going to run in this seat. So usually if somebody steps down, people want to run in the vacant seat rather than running against an opponent. It's called the place system. The place system at least allows you to hold somebody accountable for their votes. Now the other system is the single member district system. The single member district system is where you divide your city up into little districts, like you would do with legislative districts in the state, right? You get to elect 1 member of the state house, and you get to elect 1 senator in the state senate. But here you divide the city up, and everybody gets to vote for 1 member of the council, but then everybody else gets to elect the mayor. Everybody else still gets to elect the mayor. So when you're in a single member system, you get to elect a member of the council, and then the citywide as a whole elects the mayor. Now, at-large systems in big cities tend to lead to a very homogeneous city council, that there's not a lot of diversity. But when you go to a single member district system and you can recognize individual populations, you tend to get a much more diverse city council that sort of better represents the population. So you'll see the big cities like Dallas use single member districts. I think Arlington actually has a sort of a blend. Some of their seats are single member and some are at large. And then of course, still everybody votes for the mayor. So let's talk about, what if you don't like your council member? Well, there's something called a recall election, and recall elections allow you to remove somebody before their term is up. And they tend to not be good ideas. We had one 2 years ago because they engender a lot of hostility, and I've heard stories where people have held grudges for 20 years. And so, especially when you're dealing with, in Canada, a 2-year term, you can't wait 1 more year to try to vote them out that way. So recall elections, to work this way, you have to get a percentage of the population of the voters who voted in the last election, or a minimum number. In Canada, that's 500, to sign a petition saying, I want to have an election to remove that person at the earliest possible time. And then those signatures are given to the city secretary, who validates them to make sure they're correct. And then they're brought to the council. And if they're correct, the council has to approve them, even if you're one of them council members they want to remove. Then you have to call a special election on the day that's available. Now, this can be troublesome. I mean, there was a city in Tarrant County, I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago. I lose track of time. And they had a recall election, and they recalled a majority of their council. So they really couldn't hold a meeting because they didn't have a quorum. So that could be a problem. But recall elections usually can be messy affairs, and they're usually a sign of a fairly divided city. And so when you saw a recall election in my city, that shows you a fairly divided city, and that actually ends up being all of our fault, and probably more so mine than anybody else's because I am the mayor. Let's talk about city finance. Where do cities get their money? Well, they get their money primarily from two major sources. And one of those are ad valorem taxes, which means by value. And the biggest ad valorem tax that you know of is a property tax. Now, a property tax is a tax based on the value of your property, and it's usually per $100 of value. So we have a 0.73 property tax, which means that if your property was worth $100, you'd pay 73 cents. If your property is worth $100,000, you pay $730. And that's used to police, fire, and all those kind of city functions to pay for those things. Now, cities can raise property taxes, but if they raise them now more than 3.5%, then it triggers an automatic rollback election where they have to have an election and have a public vote on whether or not they approve that property tax increase. That's a tough thing. That's something that was just recently at the state legislature. I think I may have showed you, or I will show you, depending on which class is looking at this, a video of me testifying against that bill, simply because by capping how much revenue we can bring in, it can cause us problems because they wanted to cap it at consumer price index, rate of inflation. But for us, construction costs rise faster than that, and healthcare costs for employees rise faster than that, but they passed it. So we'll live with it and we'll work within it. But a rollback election would have to happen after you adopt your budget, and then it would happen in November, and then you'd have to go back and then figure ways to cut your budget if they didn't approve it. So it's a difficult thing, but everybody's concerned about rising property taxes, and I think that's a legitimate concern. The other place where cities get taxes or money is from sales taxes. Now, the state sales tax is 6.25%. Cities can tack on a total of another 2 cents. 1 cent can go into your general fund, the money used to pay for everything else. You can send for the other cent by going to the voters and creating a special district sometimes for sales taxes. You can create an economic development corporation, and you use part of those taxes for that. So for example, in Canada, we have 1 cent of the sales tax going into the general fund, and then we have another 1 cent of tax. Half of that cent goes to lowering the property tax values or property taxes. And then the other cent, a half cent, goes to the Economic Development Corporation, which is designed to bring in businesses into the community. Now, some cities use that 1 cent extra cent or half cent to fund crime control districts, to fund street districts, park districts. They can fund a lot of different things with that extra penny. But that's as high as you can go, and that's why the maximum is 8.25. Arlington has used part of their sales tax money to build stadiums. So Dallas uses 1 cent of its sales tax money to help fund DART, their light rail system. So the idea is in a city is to get more money in sales taxes. If you can get more retail in, more sales tax in, then you can lower your property taxes. And so Kennedale has a higher property tax ratio than some of the surrounding cities because we lack a lot of retail business to bring into the city. And that means we get less in sales taxes. And you might say, well, why don't you bring in more retail? Well, we're sort of a landlocked city, and our major highway already has businesses on it, salvage yards, some used car lots. There's a lot of things in there that just don't generate a lot of sales taxes. And so you'd have to redevelop those properties. And of course, those people have legitimate property rights. And so you just can't go around and bully people in that manner. So There are other ways that cities make some money. One is franchise fees. Cities have right-of-ways along the roadways, and gas companies, internet companies, electric companies bury their lines there, and they pay the city for the use of being able to bury their lines there. We also make money off impact fees. Impact fees are when you build a new house, like if a new subdivision comes in, it's going to impact how we deliver water, take away sewage, roads, and whatever. And so we charge a fee for each new house built. And I think in Canada that adds up to about $8,000 that will offset the needed expenditures to accommodate that new subdivision. You can't just give it outrageous sums. It's got to be money that's equivalent to what is needed to upgrade your infrastructure for that particular subdivision. So cities can have make money off tickets, but we tend not to do that. We've had this philosophy that the job of the police department is safety, not revenue gaining. So, we don't generate a lot of revenue from tickets or fines. We try not to do that. Now, cities can also borrow money. We borrow money just like everybody else. Now, keep in mind, though, that cities must maintain a balanced budget. Now, a balanced budget means that, yeah, we can borrow money to fund a street, an infrastructure project, but as long as we have extra money coming in to pay on that debt, we can. We can't borrow money and say, all right, we're going to hire all these police officers and we're going to borrow money to pay them. We can't do that. Cities are usually required to keep an 18 to 25% surplus in case there is an emergency. Then the city can continue to operate for a while on that surplus. So you're probably seeing right now with this corona crisis is that some cities may be having to dip into their reserves, is what we call a reserve fund, because their sales tax dollars are declining. So, but we still can borrow money. And we borrow money through several ways. One is through a certificate of obligation. A certificate of obligation is a bond that the city can just issue. We issue it usually for needs. If we need to get a sewer line or a water line fixed, we don't have time to take that to a vote of the voters and have them approve or disapprove it. And if they disapprove it, then we can't even do it. We can't do anything with it for another 2 years before we can actually go back to them. So certificate of obligations are for things that are needed right away. Now, things that you want, let's say you want a new fire station or you want a new library, usually you go through what you call a general obligation bond. And that's a bond where you take it to the voters and the voters decide yay or nay. And usually you want to take that to the voters because it might increase their property taxes and they should have a say on that. We had talked briefly about doing actually a lot about doing a new police and fire station, and we would take that to the voters. Now, the question is now, as I'm recording this, we're going through the coronavirus problem, and the markets have dropped, and unemployment is up. So would voters be willing to approve that kind of a capital project? And my guess is probably not. So that probably is going to delay a lot of people from going out to for general obligation bonds to build things. I think it's going to delay a lot of those things. Now, some places, and we don't see it very much anymore, use revenue bonds. A revenue bond is when you borrow money, but you pay it back by whatever you built generation of funds. So you borrow $10 million to build a golf course with a revenue bond. And then your job is to use the green fees, for example, part of the green fees to pay off that bond. That's usually not as popular anymore, simply because bond agencies and people that want to buy city bonds, loan city money, they like a more stable source of money. And that's usually the general fund, which is based on property taxes. They know that that's going to come through rather than depending on whether people are going to go to the golf course or not. So I think that's all about city government that I got for you today. Tomorrow we will talk about, tomorrow, I don't say tomorrow, it could be just 5 minutes from now as far as you know. We'll talk about county government and special districts. And that'll wrap up this semester this very strange semester, and I'll have a review for you for the Unit 4 test. So we'll catch up later.